2 days before he died, he released quite possibly one of the best albums he'd ever made, and it actually dealt with the subject of his own death, because he knew it was coming. He didn't tell the rest of us, we were actually horribly shocked, but he knew it was coming and he dealt with it really creatively and came to terms with it and seemed to really channel his best work. So that was an extract there that you heard from the main song. So throughout his life, David Bowie was always searching for information about the human condition, what it is to be human. And he did this through his art. Luckily he was a creative, so he had a path to do with it. So through his music and his art, lots of symbolism throughout his whole life. But it wasn't always a straight journey. So he's quite famous for the different personas that he used to have, and for constantly reinventing himself. Always something new, always something fresh, always a new perspective. But in his early life, he went through a bit of an up and down journey, trying to find what works, what fits, what should I be doing, what's everybody else doing. And he sort of had a few false starts. And he's believed to have preferences for ISFP. So that introverted feeling, who am I, what am I about, what's my identity? That artisan temperament. If you see early interviews of him, he, very in an introvert style, says, I just wanted to be well known. So wanting to make that impact and trying to find ways of being noticed and making an impact. And also, for you that use the Enneagram, he's believed to be a 3 with a 4 wing, which in itself is a tricky one. Absolute identity crisis time. So on the one hand, wanting to be seen, wanting to be understood, wanting to be known, but also wanting to be hidden and unique. So a lot of 4s actually express themselves through art because it keeps some of them hidden. And he talks about sometimes having tussles with these different personas, that they were aspects of him. And sometimes he'd get over-involved in them and lose his identity and have to put it back together again. So quite an interesting journey. And I can't remember because I'm not very good at time, but a year or 2 ago, he released a song out of the blue from nowhere called Where Are We Now? And in the video here, it struck everyone as a little bit weird, but there was this 2-headed but one-bodied puppet with a projection of his face on one side and a female face on the other side. And if you're into your Jungian archetypes, it represents that idea of actually reaching that point where you feel integrated, anima, animus. And in the background on the screen were sort of reflections of his life. So, pretty cool stuff. So yes, thank you David Bowie for good food for my presentation. And everything else. So, re-energizing type development for ourselves and our clients. Re-energizing ourselves, reinventing ourselves. Do you remember this from Thursday? Gladly sent to me by Jane, if you were here on Thursday. What do people say about type? I've been done. I've done that. I'm an ESPN. Been done. Got that. I've taken it 4 times. Yeah, been done 4 times. My type keeps changing. Type say this last year. I don't remember my type code, but I think I was yellow. So those are the sorts of things that we hear very frequently, and not just from our clients, we hear them also as practitioners. So someone will say, I've got a 6-week program, week 1 we're doing type, what can we do in the other weeks? Yeah? So practitioners do it too. Got your stamp. And quite often it stops at the best fit type. You've got your letters, you've read the description, and what do we do then for development? We often say, okay, you're an INTJ, you need to develop sensing and feeling. Yeah, do I? Do I? I do, don't I? But that's usually where we go. We usually go with develop what you're not. Yeah? And that's really not the plan. So where is the actual type development? Oh, I hate labels, I forgot about that one. So let's have a look at what Jung said about us as people. So here we have, this is cropped up in a few people's presentations. In fact, almost everything I'm going to talk about is cropped up, so it's a nice synthesis at the end. We have here Jung's map of the psyche. And it's big. We've got on top our outward persona. So this is the faces we meet the world with, the different roles we play. And in a good way, we need these different personas. We need to be able to show up as slightly different people in different places. Yeah, so what was it Roy Charles said this morning? If Barack Obama suddenly walked into the room, we'd all behave a bit differently. And if a little kid walked into the room, we'd all behave a little bit differently. It's just been taken out. So we have different personas. But it's important that that persona has something to do with our true self, that it's not false. And then we have the ego. The ego is the big bit that tells us who we are. So if you say to somebody, tell me about yourself, they'll usually describe the ego. Yeah? So, oh, I'm creative, I'm inventive, I'm directive, I like a plan, all that stuff. That's the ego talking, who you think you are. And that forms quite early in life. So theoretically, we start off a bit more whole, and we start to split off. This is me, this is not me. This is what I'm like, this is what I'm not like. This is what I do, this is what I don't do. And eventually we come up with what we believe to be an identity, and that's the ego. In the core of it all is the true self. Who are you really? And some of that, you'll see, is in the unconscious. It takes us a while maybe to find that. Sometimes because we've shoved it into the unconscious, or sometimes it just hasn't come to awareness yet. And then it's surrounded by the collective unconscious, which is a sort of bigger picture, patterns, images, archetypes that influence us from the outside. And type sits there, mostly in the ego, some aspects of self in there, but very much in the ego. Okay. So I'm going to come back to that. So when we do type work, quite often we cover a nice patch of ego. Yeah? We get people to understand some information about themselves that fits with who they think they are. Basically because we ask them and they say, this is who I think I am. What I want to show you is if we develop that further and do real type development, we can capture this much of their psyche and get some real integration and understanding. Because the plan is to try and integrate these bits with each other. So, deep thought about life. We must all dance the music of our own drum. What if our own drum's broken or we're hearing someone else's drum by mistake? So it's important to start off finding out who we think we are. So identifying that ego, yeah, and getting it right, making sure that we're on the right track to who we are. Then once we've done that, we want to try and escape from it. So why do you fly outside the box? I fly outside the box because I can. But we know the box, we're safe inside the box. That, my friend, is why I leave it, for you may be safe, but I am free. So it's really important to know our types, because knowing our types and working with our types helps us to find places and activities that really motivate us, where we're just absolutely in flow, we enjoy it, it's great, and we can create a lovely little comfort zone where we operate at our best. But the world's not always like that. We have to be able to leave that box. And ultimately, that type can become a trap. It can limit us. So if you go through life with the, this is me, this is not me, this is what I do, this is not what I do, you're going to start to have a quite limited experience. So you need to first find where you are so you know what it is you're breaking out of. Okay? So let's have a look at what Jung said. Type development, differentiation and individuation. I think you've all heard these terms here and there this week. And quite often we talk about differentiation at the early lifespan, individuation towards the end of life. Does anyone actually really know much about what it means though? Yeah? Is it just about being yourself and then putting it back together? Okay, so let's go through, there's three different aspects to this. There's mental process differentiation, which is how am I using my judging and perceiving? What am I doing? I'm going to talk a bit more about each one. There's preference pair differentiation. Which preference am I actually using? Am I using it clearly? And then the internal differentiation. Within that one preference, how am I using it? Okay. So these are all other things to develop. So let's have a look at preference pair. So if you don't have good preference pair differentiation, your preference can be somewhat contaminated by the other one. So for example, I might say, yeah, I use thinking, I'm logical and I'm objective when I make my decisions, and I'm trying to get the best outcome, the best result, the best answer. Yeah. Now, if I'm not very well differentiated, and most of us aren't, sneakily, I have a bit of, I know what's important to me in this, I sort of know what I want to happen. If there's any contradictory analysis that goes with what I don't really like, I might ignore it. So I'm actually being influenced a bit by the feeling side and not being truly objective. Okay. So it's things like that, how clearly you're using a preference. And the thing about it is that will happen unconsciously, and you will think, your ego will tell yourself you've been absolutely Mrs. T, and your unconscious has actually been pulling the strings, your unconscious and your ego. So it's about becoming aware of those things and being able to question them. So a lack of awareness of your motives for things can come up. If you can actually start to get this going, you can start to use both sides appropriately. So using the best of each side, using it at the right time. So we don't want to be one-sided, we want to try and use both, but appropriately. And that transcendent function comes into here, transcending this idea of polarities and opposites. Okay, mental process differentiation. This is where your judging and perceiving functions are not used in good balance. And Isabel Miles was particularly interested in this. This is the basis of the step 3 instrument. So what happens if our judging and perceiving aren't used in good balance? If we've got too much judging, we might make hasty decisions. Too much perceiving, we might never quite rein it in. So again, the ego is controlling the individual unconsciously. So servant-helper, at a very good BAPT conference a few years ago, I heard this theory from someone. The servant versus helper is where one function is serving the other rather than helping it, rather than giving it balance. So for example, as an INTJ, sometimes I think, woo, I've got a really good idea of something I want to do. Yeah? And I get all excited about my idea and I spend ages thinking about it, and then I go, okay, logically, how am I going to make this work? And the logic might be hinting at, that's really not going to work. And I'll sort of brush those bits aside and say, just come back when you can tell me how it can be. Yeah? Because I want this to happen. Whereas if it was my helper, and I could recognise that and have the ego integrity to have my bubble burst, I would accept that actually there's some logic here saying it's not going to work. Yeah. So getting the auxiliary and the dominant working well together is a really important thing. And balance, using them in balance. And finally, the internal differentiation. This is appropriate use of the different aspects of a preference. So every preference has its good qualities and its slightly less pleasant qualities. And some people might not realise what they're doing because they're just acting as they normally do. So, you know, again, to use thinking because it's an easy target to pick on. The thinking function can be purely objective, analytical, helpful, all that stuff. It can also be blunt, critical, bullying, overbearing. Yeah? And they all come under the realm of thinking. So it's being able to separate out, how am I using that thinking, which aspects am I using, and am I getting the best out of it? Okay, and this can also lead to projection, not off-putting at all, so, also lead to projection onto others, because sometimes we project the bad stuff from ourselves onto other people. So I might come and say, do you know, so-and-so, ever so bossy, not realising that I'm actually bossy myself. So recognising the negative aspects as well as the qualities, and starting to see the shadow of oneself, knowing that that's in you, and trying to keep a check on it. So this is all about you gaining control over your personality, getting more mindful, more awareness, so that you can make those choices and not be having your strings pulled by your ego puppet master. Okay. And then we move towards individuation, putting it all together again. So the differentiation, in my mind, doesn't sort of happen and stop at a point and then you shift gears into individuation. I think the differentiation keeps continuing. You've always got to keep a check on yourself, asking yourself what you're doing. But it's all going towards this individuation, putting things back together again, becoming a whole. And by that it means encompassing, being aware of that shadow side, aware of all the different aspects and the influences on you, so that you can take more charge over yourself. So that sounds all a bit messy and nebulous. You know, how do you do it? When? With who? With what? So those of you who have been at my things before know that I'm a big fan of the ego development theory. I didn't invent this. This is from Jane Loevinger, and then was developed by Susanne Cook-Greuter. And what this is a stage model showing the different stages that we tend to go through in our personal development. So it's a bit more, it's not completely linear, it actually goes backwards and forwards a bit, but it's a bit more linear than the stuff we just looked at. So you've got these, I've whittled it down to 7 because they were the ones that were useful for what I was doing. And I've actually changed the names to make them type neutral as well. So in a moment I'll take you through and show you what these all mean. But just as a quick overview, to end it, what changes through the levels of development? So you get a broadening of perspective. Yeah. So in the early stages you'll see black and white. Yeah, just black and white, either or. Then you start to see that actually there's some nuances and shades of grey, and then actually you see a spectrum, that there's absolutely all different perspectives and opinions. So that's more the cognitive aspect. Increased self-awareness, getting to know yourself better, is what comes through the levels. So at the early stages, people just operate on autopilot. They're not thinking about what they're doing, why they're doing it, who they're doing it for. They're just doing. And towards the end, there's a lot more mindfulness of catching yourself in the act and being able to self-monitor. Increased emotional intelligence, so awareness of self and others, and also more collaborative relationships. So the early stages are quite defensive. You know, you're the centre of the universe, you have to protect yourself. And then as you go through life more, there's more sharing, collaboration. I think Roy touched on this morning, talking about relationship evolving. And less defensiveness, you've got less to defend. So people at the early stages are very defensive. Do you know the Freudian ego defense mechanisms? Use those in buckets. Doesn't mean that people at later stages don't use them, but they might use the less damaging ones, slightly more aware. And generally increased mindfulness as you go through. Okay, so those of you who've been here before, you've seen this. But an analogy for what it's like to be at a particular stage of development is this. So supposing you live in the jungle, you were born in the jungle, you know everything about the jungle. So you know your jungle plants, you know your monkeys, your insects, your water sources and all that stuff. You are an expert on that jungle. But to you that's the whole world, there's nothing else outside that. And then one day you climb up your tallest jungle tree and in the distance you see a snow-capped mountain. And you think, what the hell is that? Yeah, that doesn't fit with what I know. So you might scurry down and hide for a bit and keep going up and having a little peek. But one day you might say, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there and have a look. So you go, you climb on the mountain, and from the mountain you can stand and look backwards at your jungle and say, wow, I thought that was it. I thought that was the whole world. But now I see there's this bit as well. But you can't look back on it until you're out of it. Okay? So who here has ever had that teenage phase where they say, oh, I know so much more than my parents. They know nothing, nothing. Looking at you there, even though you're only 7. And then you look back a few years later and you actually realise that you knew nothing. Yes, but you don't know it when you're in it. So you're on your mountain, you spy a desert, you go over to the desert, you look back from the desert, you see mountain, you see jungle. Yeah? But for each of these, you spend time in there developing. You don't hop from one to the other at the speed of light. You spend time in there. There's a lot of growth to do within each stage. And so on, and so on, and so on. Okay. And the other thing to note is that you don't develop everything at the same time. So there are these different strands of development that might happen. So some people might be really hot on the self-awareness, but not so great on the broad cognitive perspective. Yeah? Or they might be geniuses that can see systems and theories and interconnections and everything, be absolutely useless at interacting with other people. Yeah? So we don't develop them all at once, and type might have something to do with which parts might come easily. We don't know yet, we're still thinking about that. But there's different strands. And development through the stages comes from having experiences. So they can be painful experiences, things off in your childhood, upbringing. They can be travel, seeing the world, seeing different people. We were talking last night about going to India and what a different perspective that puts on your whole world view of everything. It's a good shift, just go to India. Stressful situations, being given work to do that's more taxing, that pushes your comfort zone. So a lot of people need to make a shift when they go from being an employee to being a manager, for example. It can be a big step change and take a lot of people time to settle into the new role. Nasty things like bereavements can help us shift perspectives and grow. And then you've got this guy meditating. It's Dario, actually. No, it's not. But the research shows that nobody at the higher levels, the more advanced levels that they interviewed, didn't meditate. And you know what you say if you go to the busy boss and say, you need to meditate 10 minutes a day? He says, I haven't got time. For you, 20 minutes. But the big message is you have to get out of your comfort zone. So all these developmental experiences are things that shove you out of your comfort zone and shatter your perspective somewhat, so that you see things differently and you need to grow. And it's not always comfortable. It can be quite a disturbing time when these things happen. So, yeah, I've got nothing to that, I just liked it. So without going out of your comfort zone, you're very unlikely to get any developmental experiences. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the stages. How am I doing time? Right. So, first stage, power and control, I've called it. And this is where there's a strong need to win. So people in this stage do tend to have problematic relationships, etc. This is the only one that's a really big problem. So they're highly defensive, they see the world in very black and white terms, and they're absolutely operating on autopilot. They don't think about what they do, they just do. Yeah? People who are different are wrong. Yeah? Weirdos. So they have no idea that other people think like them, because basically they just don't think about much. You're unlikely to meet many adults who are permanently at this stage unless you're working with particular groups. For example, some prison populations or certain mental health groups and things like that, you may encounter the occasional individual. However, with this model, we can all revert there. Yeah? So when we're stressed or upset, or what happens when somebody cuts you up in the car park? You're straight there, aren't you, on the horn? You fool, you can't drive. Yeah, so you can drop straight into that anytime you like. Okay, not now though, because we're doing nice things. So that's the first one. Then social identification. This is usually the stage that hits people when they're older children or teenagers. So some of you here working with kids might recognise this. But this is where they get a bit of a need to fit in. Who am I? Where do I belong? What should I be doing? Yeah. So they might identify themselves by the way they dress, with their gang and their music and all this stuff. And the people who dress differently and like the other music are wrong. Yeah. So in group, out group. And a lot of adults are sort of in this phase or revert to this phase of in group, out group. You know, marketing hates IT. IT hates sales, yeah, you get it in offices. So it's another stage that we revert back to very easily. And then personal identity. This is one of the modal stages. So this one and the next one are when most people end up stopping their development. And this is where you know who you are. Yeah, I'm me. That's cool. I know what I like now, I'm going to go out and find a job doing this such a thing because that's what I like doing. So you start to carve out your niche, and that's fine. But you might not be that good at flexing to the other people or understanding the other people. Determined action phase is where you feel like you need to find answers to things, that if I do this, then this will happen. So these might be the people who say, I'm really interested in personal development and improving my management skills. What do I need to do? Is there a program I can go on? Yeah? If I do this course, it will happen. So it's good, and this is where most people are at, but it's a sort of slightly limited view. It's like, yes, we can fix this with a process, with a system, if we make things happen. From here, there's a bit of a jump into the next 3 stages, and the next 3 stages are fairly similar to each other. The difference is subtle. But considerate individualism is where you do actually have quite a broad perspective, quite good self-awareness, but it can come with a feeling of inner conflict, because you start to see that everything's actually possibly right. It's all both and, rather than either or, and you don't know which way to turn. So you can actually feel quite conflicted and indecisive about things. And in the next one, you've actually managed to synthesize that, so that confusion tends to be gone, apparently. And you can synthesize these different viewpoints. And then the top one's called Magician, which just sounds cool. And this is where you've got a very integrated perspective. You know what you're doing, you operate in flow a lot. Yeah, all that stuff. So, is that okay with everyone? A quick whip through? So, I'm going to try and focus in on particularly what we do with type with these different things. Obviously there's a whole other stuff that we do to develop, but just in terms of type, keeping this journey going, keeping revisiting it. But first of all, just to match it to the Jungian thing, on these stages and upwards you'll be doing differentiation type of stuff. And the individuation piece really starts towards those upper levels. I mean, you're always working towards it, but it starts to fall into place in those upper levels. So it's a good fit with Jung's theory. If you've got any questions or anything to speak, I'm starting to get that and I'm talking too much for you. So, someone on power and control. I'm not going to spend too long on the early stages because we don't see them that often. But as I said, they're operating on autopilot. They don't know they've got a type. But if you ask them who they were, they say, yeah, I'm this and I'm that. But they would be not that unaware that actually it's a preference, it's a default setting that they're working with. So they know their own style, yeah? But they have no idea about other people other than other people are weird or wrong. So for them, to start shifting it, just the very basic idea about type. Do you know those people that think differently? Really? Now, don't expect them to get an appreciation of those differences, but just that awareness of how weird, not everybody thinks like me. Yeah? It's enough to go home with. This one here, social identification, this is where they've got a lot of tension. They're all, I should be this, I should be that, what should I be, what works? So I was coaching this guy, and even though he was a grown-up, he was saying, oh yeah, I went for this promotion and I didn't get it, but I didn't really want to go for it, but I thought I should because it looks good and it's what you do, and I've been in my job 3 years and that's what people tend to do, but yeah, it doesn't fit. And then he was talking about how he bought a CD, saying, I bought this CD, but I think it's sort of kiddie music, so I shouldn't really be listening to it, should I? And I was like, well, if you say should one more time. But that's the sort of thing you'll hear a lot from people who are stuck in this tension point. So what they need is a sense of identity. So really, let's try and clarify what your type is. Who are you? That's got to be our starting point. I also worked with a group from a certain belief system. They live in a community together, and they do awesome, lovely charitable work, and they were the loveliest people ever. But so many of them were stuck in this, they couldn't differentiate between their own preferences and the style of the belief system they were in. And one lady sort of was hinting towards, oh, I think I've got a thinking preference, oh, I have got a think, and we talked her through it. And then she cried, she was so upset, I've got a thinking preference. So there was a lot of coaching around, you know, that's okay, and it does still fit with your belief system, it doesn't make you any worse on it. But just that idea of, do I fit with that norm, do I fit with my group? So it can be pretty tough. Right, so these are the people you'll meet a lot of. Personal identity, I am this, okay? So heavily identified with that ego, who am I? and not much value for difference in other people. So it's like, oh yeah, there's some people here who always want to do it this way, but it's not right, and I'm trying to make them learn to do it this way instead. So they won't appreciate that difference. So in a way, what they need to learn is, what's the impact of you on others? What's your style? So all that stuff about how bluntly they might be using their preferences. Are they using the rough edge of their preference? Are they in balance? Will be really useful stuff to explore. Because quite a lot of the time they'll be having communication issues and stuff. So one example, I coached a lady who was ESTJ, and she was really nice, and she said, oh, I really work my butt off for everybody and make all these plans, and I go to the team meeting and I get it all out there, and all I get is argued with or resistance, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And very, very easily we brought in a bit of type dynamics. So do you know the bubble head thing? This is what's coming out of your mouth, this is what's in your thought cloud, your introvert function. So it's like, okay, so you're telling people what the plan is, what they need to do, and all that stuff. Do you tell them where you got that idea from? Have you involved them in that stage of pulling together ideas? And she said, well, no, I just tend to go, look, just trust me, I've done the work, it'll be fine. And so we sent her away with a little task of, bring that out more, whatever it is that's going on in your head, extrovert it. And it completely changed everything. So she just went there with a bit more explanation of what she was doing and why, got a bit of involvement at that stage too, and got buy-in. So simple use of type dynamics, which, this group probably does a lot of, but the average practitioner doesn't. They don't know what to do with that. And it's enough to start looking at that impact and causing that development. And for real goals as well, communication, conflict. It's not just theoretical, how exciting, let's do this. And this one as well, I am and you are. So there's quite a good position here of people who are starting to appreciate differences. And they're like, do you know what, I'm an INTJ, and I really do need the help of somebody with a different perspective on this. So I go and find them and I work together with them, and that's great. Yeah, so it's really good state of being. And this is the level you need to be at if you're in management. Okay? Earlier, it's not quite going to work. So if somebody's going for a management position and they're in that earlier stage, they need developing up to here as much as you can. So this works quite well with management. They appreciate others' differences. They can pull together different resources. So what they need to do now is starting to realise they've got those resources within themselves. So actually, is there something you could bring to that? Is there a perspective you can get? So you're starting to deal more with their unconscious, the preferences that maybe they don't prefer. That always sounds weird, doesn't it? Preferred, not preferred. So some of this JP differentiation, the servant-helper can be important. But here, this is the main bit, the start of using more transpersonal or creative techniques. Because the only way to get inside is not to talk to the ego anymore, yeah? Mm-hmm. So talking about it, exploring it, questionnaires, all that will come from the ego telling you what's what. You don't want him in the picture, yeah? We'll cut him out and we'll ask your body, your mind, your spirit what it knows about you. So creative techniques, projective drawing, Gestalt techniques of moving chairs. Do you do those things where you put someone in a different chair so they've got a different perspective? Yeah, and suddenly they understand and they feel that perspective within themselves and they can carry that with them. So very powerful, transpersonal, creative techniques start to be very useful at this stage to move people towards that individuation. Now I've never coached anyone beyond this level, so there aren't many of them. But this is where they're starting to be on the cusp of, this is what I could be. I'm starting to see that I have these other resources, that I could be more than I thought I was, and I don't want to limit myself anymore. Okay. But they've got that inattention. So what they want here, magic word of the day, is to start being able to think about how you synthesize and get that transcendence going. And you can't just conjure up a transcendent function. You can't say, right, that's not working and that's not working. Transcendent function, I'll get you out. It doesn't work that way. It's like it has to come to you. And again, the best way to get to that, the best way is actually to sleep on it. Who's ever gone to bed with a dichotomous dilemma and in the morning just thought, I know what to do, and it was neither of those two things. Yeah? That's an example of transcendent function. Okay, so sleep on it is always a good thing. Go to the gym, leave it for a while, come back. But transpersonal techniques as well, creative, arts, again, gestalt, body movements, all that stuff can really help to find those other answers. I was on a course this week where I actually witnessed somebody with a dilemma, and they were acting it out in terms of like two roles, and then, not quite sure how the magic happened actually, but somewhere in the middle she resolved the dilemma and came up with a whole new perspective. And that was just done with, do you know constellations? Where you sort of moving things around, but with real people. So, in other words, stop talking about it, get more into finding about where it lives in a person. Okay. And then this, like I said, I've never coached anyone beyond here, so this is all theoretical, but this is where people realise they are becoming something. Yeah, they're really feeling that growth, very well integrated. And really then it's about seeing that systems view. How do I fit in? What's my collective history and how's that affecting me? How does my one issue manifest itself in a bigger world issue? This is another thing we do a lot on our course, and it's quite weird. Someone comes with one little thing that's affecting their life, and the more you talk about it, the more it unpacks into this massive world issue that's happening, and that's always been happening. So it's quite a strange thing. But somehow realising that helps them to come to terms with it a bit more. And I have no idea what these guys need. I think they're probably all right. But people at this stage, they'll want coaching because they'll appreciate the idea of coaching, support, self-reflection. All those last three stages will probably be the people who want coaching because they know that self-reflection and working things through and reflecting and meditating and all that is good for you. Okay, so sticking that onto the model there, it shows you that at different stages you might be able to employ these different techniques. So you get type back out of the bag. Let's revisit type and look at this. Always in connection with whatever the issue is though, whatever the person's issue is. But what about you people? We've been talking about clients, you as a type practitioner. So if I apply type practice to the same system, and I'm not here saying that this is where you're at in your actual personal development, but just in your working with type. If you're at that early stage of power control, you'll be one of those type tellers. And I've met a couple of those in my time. They cause a lot of damage, which then I have to spend a lot of time on doing. And they are people who think, I know everything about type, and come here, I bet I can tell you your type in 2 minutes. Yeah? And even with people who know their type and have known their type for a long time, they'll say, you're not that, you're this. Yeah? So a type teller is using it to be in a position of power. It's no good to anybody, but they exist. I've seen them. The next stage, and this is where a lot of very new practitioners who've just come out for training find themselves, that this is a process. I have here my booklet, I have my set of cards, and what you do is you get people to write their name with this hand, that hand, and you turn the page of the book, then you ask them a question about flat pack furniture, and then you ask them this, and then they say, yes, I'm an N, and then you go to the next one, and at the end you say, here's your type, read that, and that's it, I'm done. I work the process, and I work it really smoothly, yeah, and it's flat. Yeah, but that's where people often start. So it's about breaking away from that. And a lot of stereotypes. You must be an E, Angelina, because you can stand in front of a room and speak. Yeah? Okay, so I'm not a cat, but certainly not an E. Then you work towards balanced exploration of preferences. People who do a really nice, good job, and they're not too worried if, you know, the best fit type and the reported type don't match. That sends these people into an absolute spin. But they're quite good at doing a balanced feedback and then applying it to this person's real life, so pretty good. More than that is starting to bring in dynamics. Yeah, this is what's seen, this is what's not seen, this is might trigger stress for you. And then going more into the complex and unconscious dynamics. So this is all the stuff Roy was talking about the stuff that's within you that wants to come out. So starting to break out of the box, break your pattern, break out of your trap. And you have to be quite a well clued up practitioner to start working at this level, which you all are because you're here, yeah? It's the others. So I'm a bit preaching to the converted here because you all come here to learn this stuff because you know it's important. Then looking at the individual in their environment, systems, perspective, and more transpersonal creative work. So they're almost like the levels of a type practitioner's competence. So do you see here, we can just keep revisiting type with people. It's not a one-hit thing, get your label, off you go. There's more and more to unfold. And at each stage, the client will have typical issues that go with those stages that type can help with. I stick that in my model as well, because I'm an INTJ and that's what I do. Stick it all together. After all that chat. So development's never ending. It just keeps going and going and going. So as we go through life, we constantly develop, we change, events happen to us and we grow as a person. But type work can actively and consciously help this to happen. So most people will plateau at a certain stage, and if they don't need to be any more well developed, then that's absolutely fine. Yeah. So if you're working in an office and you've got a home and things like that, that level of social identity might be a fine place for you to be. But if you're the leader of the free world, it's not going to work out quite so well for you. And we all know where the perceptive possible next one is. I think he's actually off the scale. So you need to match your development to what your role is. We don't go all charging towards being magicians. Yeah, that's not the plan here. It's what do I need to fulfil my role. So what I've been trying to say is, type's not something that you have done to you. It's not a one-hit wonder. It's about continuously evolving awareness of who you are and what's going on for you and how that affects your life. But the individual needs to be ready for it. So if you've got someone at the social identity stage, don't go steaming in there with transpersonal techniques and weird things, because they'll just think, what the hell is this person doing? I mean, this morning Roy gave us lots of invitations. If you want to leave the room now, you can, because we're going to do something weird. Because you have to be ready for it. And that plan, that ego model, can help you know if somebody's going to be ready for it. So good practitioners can facilitate it, but you have to work on yourself. It's really hard to inflict this stuff on someone else if you haven't experienced it yourself. So I want to echo what Anne O'Sullivan said a couple of years ago. You have to do this work on yourself. So even for yourselves, it's not good enough to say, I've been trained and I've been on a couple more courses. You have to spend time with people talking type, as you've been doing. How is your type for you? And constantly looking deeper into yourselves to make yourself able to work. Hopefully tied into the theme of re-energizing type. Okay. But back to the lovely Mrs. Bowie. It's not a linear process. It's not a path that we do one thing and another again. It swirls. We go up and down in that development cycle. We have dips, we have troughs, we have little peaks where we rush up to the top for a few moments and come back down. Okay, so it's not quite a journey. We're all arriving and departing at the same time. Okay, that's all I have to say on the topic. Obviously, this is the end of the conference. Quite a few thank yous to dish out. So firstly, well, thank you to all of you who came to the conference. And some of you have travelled really far to be here. We're just really chuffed about that. So thank you very much for that. And the speakers who all come up here under their own steam, they give their time for free. And we've had a fantastic array of speakers this year. And also to the board who arranged all this. I didn't do much this year. Susan put the conference together. Chris did all the website stuff. Louise has been doing all the finance. Everybody seems to have had a hand in dealing with the venue. Sarah did all the conference bookings. Janet got all the AGM stuff ready. So it's been a hell of a lot of work. But we've managed to pull it off. So that's good. And we hope you've had a nice time. So thanks to the... notices, there's the reminder about the surveys that people have asked you to complete. Monday, I don't know if Jane, if you want any more punters for your workshop, but
We have one more set of materials if anyone else wants to join a group that's already from 5 or 6 countries. I've lost track.
yeah, intentional leadership model here on Monday, if anyone's interested, see Jane. In your bags, you've got a thing about Type Coach, a free webinar, but if you log onto it anyway, you'll be able to have a sample of the Type Coach tools as well, so that's in your bags just to draw your attention to it. And Susan?
And finally, for APTI, the International Association of Psychological Type, there's a coaching using multiple type lenses, a webinar series that I'm volunteering my time for. So there's a 2-hour temperament webinar, then a recorded 2-hour interaction styles webinar, a 2-hour cognitive processes webinar, a 2-hour BB archetypes webinar. Those 3 are recorded. Then the final one is a live contextual coaching webinar. And then you can do just those, or you can also take a 40-question assessment and 6 case studies, and you get an APTI coaching certificate using multiple type lenses. It really rolls off the tongue. So it'll be somewhere on the APTI website, which I think is a big A, big T, little I.org, something like that. So you'll find it, I'm sure. Association of Psychological Type International.
Okay, well, I think that's it. If you could fill in your evaluation forms. One thing I'd really like, if you've got a minute, think of the one thing you're going to do differently in your type practice as a result of the conference and scribble it on the back of your evaluation form. I'd be really interested to see. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.